from China overnight, this quote: "The Australian side is reacting so strongly to my colleague's Twitter. Does that mean they think the cold-blooded murder of Afghans is justified? The Australian government should feel ashamed of this." What do you make of their response to our response yesterday?
Peter, I'm very happy to compare Australia's human rights record with the Chinese Communist Party's human rights record any day of the week. Australia's not a perfect country, and we admit that. And we, as a liberal democracy, we're open about that. And in the case of the investigation into Afghan soldiers, it was in fact our own soldiers, our own SAS members who came forward, who blew the whistle on their colleagues who they believed had done the wrong thing. And the government responded by commissioning a multi-year investigation to get to the bottom of it, and we're now acting on it. The contrast with the Chinese Communist Party couldn't be clearer. In 1989, after Tiananmen Square massacre, a Chinese general was in fact charged, convicted, sentenced to 5 years jail and had his Communist Party membership revoked because he didn't fire on his own citizens, because he didn't allow his troops to kill their own citizens. That is the difference between the Chinese Communist Party and Australia. We punish our perpetrators, they punish those who try to do the right thing.
Yeah, and you bring up Tiananmen Square, and I was going to ask you about this too, because this Foreign Ministry spokesman who made that tweet yesterday has a bit of form. In the past, he suggested that Tiananmen Square, the massacre there, was merely a political disturbance for which China's response was correct. So what do you think this says about the Foreign Ministry? It seems to be that they're a bunch of wind-up merchants at the moment.
Well, if you think about what the task of a foreign ministry is on behalf of their nation, it's to increase their stature and standing in the world, to improve their relations with the world. And if you look at the last year of Chinese foreign relations, they've gone backwards massively. So I suspect the Chinese Foreign Ministry is trying to distract from their own failure. I mean, think about what's happened in the last 12 months, even without COVID. The number of countries that have followed Australia's lead in banning Huawei from their 5G network has massively surged across Europe, North America and Asia. I mean, that's a key performance indicator for the Chinese Foreign Ministry. Huawei they describe as a state champion and they provide enormous support for, and they've failed again and again and again to persuade countries to allow them into their 5G network, because other countries have made the same decision Australia has, which is our digital sovereignty is too important and shouldn't be ceded.
Yeah, well, Penny Wong, she's already said this morning that Australia's got to continue pivoting away from China. Matt Canavan on the show a short time ago, he said the same thing. What's your view? What should be the strategy from an Australian perspective now?
Well, I agree with the comments by Penny Wong, and I agree with the comments by Matt Canavan, and this is a time for national unity. This is a time for all Australians to stand together, to send a very strong message that these sort of tactics will not work. They will not dissuade us from pursuing our national interests. They will not dissuade us from standing up for our democracy, for defending our sovereignty, and that we are a strong and resilient nation. Other countries have been where we are. In 2016, the South Korean government agreed to an Obama administration request to place THAAD missiles within their territory, and they were subject to a very similar campaign of economic coercion. And eventually it passed. It did disrupt their trade. It was damaging for some sectors in particular, but eventually it passed. And it will pass too for us, but only if we demonstrate that we will not be intimidated by it.
But if we keep standing our ground, it's going to come at even more of a cost, right? Because I suppose more tariffs are going to come for even more sectors.
There's no question, Peter, this will be a test of our national resilience. It is going to be a difficult period ahead in China-Australian relations, and unfortunately a very lucrative trading relationship which has benefited both sides is going to be disrupted. But it is not going to be disrupted because of anything that we have sought to do. All we've sought to do is to stand up for ourselves and protect our own interests. We've not sought to impose our interests on China, only they have decided to do that to us. And so there really is no alternative. Look at those list of 14 demands that the Chinese embassy has publicised. Which one of those could we ever agree to? Which one of those could any Australian government ever agree to? There's not a single one that I would be happy agreeing to. And if we're not willing to agree to that, then we have to accept that we're going to have a difficult time in this relationship, and all we can do is get through it.
There had been some critics on this morning, particularly from the Lowy Institute that I read about, James, that said our response was overly emotive and played into China's hands yesterday. We shouldn't have deployed our top asset, being our Prime Minister, to respond to a junior-level official in Chinese ministry. Do you believe that the PM was right to act the way he did?
I mean, that sort of commentary is just not real world, Peter. Australians expect their Prime Minister to respond. He responded completely appropriately and he reflected the feelings of all Australians when he did so. I've rarely been prouder than when I see our Prime Minister standing up on the international stage, representing our country, standing up for our interest and our values. He's done an exceptional job in a difficult period over the last few years, and I think all Australians should rally behind him and support him in our national interest.
Are you anticipating that Australians may well boycott Chinese products?
Well, there's certainly no need for the government to encourage or sanction any kind of activity like that, because I think Australians will make up their own minds about that. They'll be making their own decisions as consumers when they walk into the supermarket to decide how they want where they want their dollars to go and how they want that to reflect their values.
Barnaby Joyce used some pretty colourful language this morning when describing that Foreign Ministry spokesperson as behaving like a stupid high school student. How would you describe it?
Well, I think childish is a reasonable description. I mean, China is a superpower. This is an official spokesperson for their foreign ministry. And he is tweeting a doctored image on social media like a child would do. It's not a mature thing for a country to do. It's certainly not something an Australian diplomat would ever do. And if they did, they'd be fired for it.
Yeah, and just on that, it's still up. Does Twitter have a role to play here? Because, I mean, Twitter's very quick in censoring tweets from, say, Donald Trump, but this one's still up, and it is a doctored tweet.
Yeah, maybe Twitter could redeploy some of the enormous internal team they've had dedicated to following Donald Trump's tweets and tagging them within 30 seconds of them being posted for disinformation, and maybe look a little bit closer at actual agents of disinformation from the Chinese Foreign Ministry and their agents and allies in Chinese state-owned media who've been spreading this kind of vile propaganda for years freely on Twitter without any restriction at all. I think that reflects on Twitter as a social media platform.